There comes a moment in every dynamic, whether it's romantic, platonic, or professional, where the one who gives the most finally stops giving. That moment is powerful, it's shocking, and it changes everything. Let's talk about the empath, the one who feels deeply, the one who sees the nuances in your tone, the shift in your body language, the unspoken fears you carry. They don't just listen to your words. They hear what you meant to say, what you were afraid to say, and sometimes even what you were hiding. And because of that, the empath is often the one who gives. They understand you when you don't understand yourself. They forgive mistakes before you've even apologized. They carry the relationship like an invisible weight on their shoulders. But here's the thing no one tells you: even the deepest well runs dry when it's never replenished. When an empath goes cold, it isn't because they've lost their heart. It's because they've finally realized their heart deserves protection. They stop chasing. They stop explaining. They stop cushioning the blow of your avoidance. And that's when the avoidant, the one who kept distance, who downplayed intimacy, who thought they could keep the empath on standby, suddenly feels the silence. Suddenly, they're the one knocking on the door that no longer opens as easily. Why? Because the empath's withdrawal creates the one thing the avoidant has run from all along: a world where they feel the abandonment. A world where they feel powerless. See, when you've been used to someone pouring love into you and that love finally freezes, the contrast is brutal. You don't realize how warm the sun was until you're left in the cold. So what do we learn here? If you're the empath, don't wait until you're depleted. Guard your energy. Your love is a gift, not an endless resource. And if you're the avoidant, don't wait until the silence to value what was given freely. Because once an empath goes cold, it's rarely temporary. It's transformation. An empath has a unique way of moving through the world. They don't just hear what someone says, they absorb the tone, the hesitation, the pauses between words. They notice the subtle eye movement that reveals discomfort, or the faint change in energy that suggests something is wrong. To them, emotions are not abstract ideas, they're data points they read and process constantly. Because of this, an empath often becomes the safe space in a relationship. They're the one who makes the effort to understand, who can interpret silence as easily as conversation, and who naturally anticipates needs without being asked. This ability makes them extraordinary partners, friends, and colleagues, because they create a level of connection that feels rare and almost irreplaceable. But this same gift carries a burden. The more the empath gives, the more they are expected to give. Their capacity to understand is often mistaken for an endless willingness to absorb hurt, neglect, or inconsistency. They find themselves apologizing for things they didn't do, smoothing over conflicts they didn't create, and providing reassurance to someone who gives little back in return. They become the anchor for others, yet no one stops to ask whether they themselves need anchoring. Over time, this dynamic creates imbalance. The empath becomes accustomed to overgiving, while the other person becomes accustomed to receiving without reciprocation. The empath rationalizes it by thinking, they've been through so much, I can't hold it against them. Or, they don't mean to withdraw, they just need space. While these thoughts come from compassion, they also mask the quiet erosion of the empath's own emotional reserves. They're constantly pouring out but rarely being filled back up. And because empaths feel everything so intensely, they often excuse behavior that would otherwise be unacceptable. If someone is avoidant, distant, or emotionally inconsistent, the empath doesn't simply see the lack of closeness. They see the underlying fear, the childhood wound, the unspoken story. Instead of setting boundaries, they lean in even further, hoping their understanding will eventually unlock the other person's willingness to meet them halfway. The empath essentially becomes both halves of the relationship, carrying the emotional labor for two people. This overextension doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, like water dripping out of a cup, a little compromise here, a little forgiveness there, until one day the empath realizes they feel drained, unappreciated, and taken for granted. What once felt like love and connection now feels like obligation and exhaustion, and yet they struggle to pull back, because their nature compels them to keep giving even when it costs them their peace. The irony is that this deep well of empathy, the very thing that makes them so valuable, becomes the reason they are most at risk of being depleted. People assume their kindness is limitless, their patience unshakable, and their compassion unconditional. But no matter how much love an empath can give, it's still a resource that requires replenishment. Without that, the cycle of over-giving eventually leads them to a breaking point where their only option is to withdraw completely. Even the most loving, patient, and understanding person has a limit. It's easy to mistake an empath's generosity for something infinite, but in reality, no matter how much they care, they cannot continue to give without receiving at least some form of emotional nourishment in return. At first, the empath may not even notice their own exhaustion. They tell themselves they're strong enough to carry it, that it's just a rough patch, or that the other person simply needs more time to grow into the relationship. They convince themselves that if they just hold on a little longer, things will shift. But the truth is, every time they give without reciprocation, they chip away at their own reserves. Over time, that depletion starts to show. The empath who once had endless patience begins to feel small flickers of irritation. Where they used to interpret distance with compassion, they now start to sense neglect. Where they once gave love freely, they begin to question whether it is truly being valued. And this shift doesn't come because they suddenly stop caring. It comes because the weight of carrying the connection alone has finally started pressing down too heavily on their spirit. The human heart, no matter how expansive, cannot thrive if it's consistently met with indifference or avoidance. What many people don't realize is that when the empath reaches this point, it isn't about drama or sudden coldness. It's about survival. They no longer have the energy to keep pouring out love into a container that has no bottom. They don't slam the door right away. They simply stop showing up in the same way. They stop sending the long messages, stop initiating the difficult conversations, stop making excuses for the other person's lack of effort. They retreat not because they want to punish, but because they must protect what little energy they have left. This moment often comes as a shock to the avoidant partner or friend. They are so used to the empath's steady presence, their endless patience, their willingness to understand that they mistake it for permanence. They assume the empath will always be there, always forgiving, always soft. But when the empath finally reaches their limit, the contrast is undeniable. The warmth that once held the relationship together is gone, and in its place is a quiet, measured detachment. The empath doesn't announce this change with fireworks. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but the impact is profound because once an empath recognizes they have been overextending themselves, the shift is rarely temporary. They begin to see with clearer eyes. They recognize patterns they use to excuse. They understand that their love is valuable and must be honored, not assumed. And once they cross that threshold, the person who once gave endlessly is no longer willing to give at all. Their limit has been reached, and with it comes a powerful transformation that rewrites the entire dynamic. When an empath finally withdraws their energy, the avoidant is forced to face something they've spent a lifetime trying to outrun, the weight of their own emptiness. For so long, the avoidant has relied on the empath to bridge the gap, to soften the sharp edges of distance, and to create a sense of closeness even when they themselves resisted it. The empath's constant reassurance, patience, and love acted like a cushion, masking the consequences of the avoidant's inability to fully engage. But the moment that cushion is removed, the silence that follows is deafening. What the avoidant once dismissed as clinginess or neediness now reveals itself as generosity. What they once saw as too much suddenly becomes the thing they crave most. The very behaviors they pushed away, the thoughtful check-ins, the emotional availability, the consistent presence, become the things they desperately miss when they are gone. In the absence of the empath's warmth, the avoidant has no choice but to sit with the void they created, and that void feels unbearable. This reversal is powerful because the empath's withdrawal creates a stark contrast. Love that once flowed so freely is suddenly absent, and the avoidant feels the chill of the emotional distance they thought they preferred. It's easy to take something for granted when it's always there, but when it disappears, the loss is felt acutely. The avoidant begins to realize that what they mistook for stability, having someone always there no matter how little they gave, was actually a privilege. And once that privilege is gone, they experience what the empath lived through for so long, longing without fulfillment. In that moment, the avoidant is not just missing the empath's presence, they are confronted with their own inability to sustain intimacy. Without the empath's emotional labor, the avoidant is exposed. The cracks in their armor become visible, and the strategies they use to avoid closeness no longer protect them. Instead, those very strategies turn into isolation. What once felt like control now feels like abandonment, and the roles suddenly reverse. It's important to understand that the avoidant doesn't beg for mercy because they have suddenly become a different person. They beg because they are experiencing the consequences of what they created. The silence terrifies them because it mirrors the very abandonment they've always feared but tried to prevent by keeping people at a distance. Now, instead of being the one who dictates the terms of connection, they are the one left waiting, unsure and afraid. The empath's withdrawal holds a mirror up to the avoidant, forcing them to see the cost of their patterns. It shows them what life looks like without the love they once resisted, and that realization can be devastating. What once felt secure, keeping someone at arm's length, now becomes unbearable because the empath's absence highlights how much they were actually holding the relationship together. The avoidance world shifts, and for the first time, they are the one longing, the one chasing, the one who finally understands the value of what they lost. When the empath finally withdraws, the entire balance of the relationship shifts. For so long, the avoidant has held the illusion of control. By keeping their distance, by rationing their affection, by pulling away when things got too close, they believed they were the ones dictating the pace and intensity of the connection. They told themselves that intimacy could be managed on their terms, that if they held the reins tightly enough, they would never have to feel overwhelmed or vulnerable. But when the empath goes silent, when they stop reaching out, when they stop filling the gaps the avoidant leaves, that control evaporates in an instant. Suddenly, the power dynamic flips. The avoidant, who once felt secure in their detachment, now finds themselves desperate for reassurance. The silence they once used as a weapon becomes unbearable when it's mirrored back to them. They feel the sting of unanswered messages, the ache of conversations that no longer happen, the loneliness of a presence that has been withdrawn. They begin to crave the very closeness they once avoided because now it's no longer guaranteed. What was once abundance, an empath's steady love and availability, has now become scarcity, and scarcity awakens urgency. This reversal is so powerful because it forces the avoidant into unfamiliar territory. They are no longer the one setting boundaries. They are the one chasing after a boundary that has already been drawn. They are no longer the one withholding affection. They are the one pleading for it to return. The empath's absence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to the avoidant just how much they depended on the love they thought they didn't need. And in that moment, they realize the dynamic they believed was protecting them was actually built on the empath's willingness to carry the weight of the relationship. What makes this shift even more striking is that the empath does not withdraw with malice. Their silence isn't designed to manipulate or punish. It's the natural result of exhaustion, of realizing that they can no longer keep giving without receiving. Yet to the avoidant, this quiet retreat feels like abandonment. The avoidant, who once feared being consumed by closeness, now fears being consumed by emptiness. And that fear drives them to reach out, to chase, to beg in ways they never imagined they would. The flip in power doesn't mean the empath suddenly dominates the relationship. Instead, it means the balance is finally exposed for what it was one-sided. The avoidant now sees what the empath has always known, that true connection cannot exist if only one person is doing the work. In their desperation, the avoidant confronts not only the loss of the empath's love, but also the reality of their own patterns. The person who once believed they had the upper hand now realizes that the real strength was never in avoidance, but in the courage to love fully. And without the empath's willingness to bridge the gap, the avoidant is left standing on the other side, finally feeling the very distance they created. Love, when it is freely given, can easily be taken for granted. The empath gives with an open heart, without keeping score, without demanding immediate returns. They give because it feels natural, because they believe in nurturing and protecting the bond they share. But that does not mean their love is infinite. It has weight, it has value, and it requires acknowledgement. The mistake so many avoidants make is assuming that this love will always be there, that the empath will always find one more ounce of patience, one more layer of forgiveness, one more reason to stay. They fail to see that every act of giving comes at a cost to the empath's energy, and that cost cannot go unpaid forever. When love is devalued, it begins to lose its vitality. An empath may continue showing up, but over time the light in their gestures starts to fade. The warmth they once poured into every interaction grows colder, not because they stopped loving, but because they realize their love is being treated as though it is disposable. This realization is where the shift happens. The empath begins to understand that their love must be protected, that it cannot survive in an environment where it is only consumed and never reciprocated. That understanding awakens a new strength in them, the strength to withdraw and to honor themselves. For the avoidant, this is often the breaking point. The person who once believed they had all the time in the world now finds themselves in unfamiliar territory. They finally recognize the gravity of what they had but failed to cherish. They see that the attention, care, and devotion they dismissed were not ordinary, they were extraordinary. And once gone, those qualities cannot be easily replaced. Suddenly, the avoidant feels urgency where they once felt indifference. They find themselves chasing after the very love they once kept at a distance because now they understand it is slipping away for good. This moment teaches both sides a profound lesson. For the empath, it becomes clear that protecting their energy is not selfish. It is necessary. They learn that love must be mutual to be sustainable, that giving endlessly without return only leads to depletion. They begin to value themselves enough to withhold their affection from those who cannot honor it. For the avoidant, the lesson cuts even deeper. They are confronted with the truth that love is not a constant to be taken for granted, but a living exchange that requires presence, effort, and vulnerability. By ignoring that, they end up losing the very thing they were most afraid of losing all along. The entire dynamic reveals a truth that applies beyond any single relationship. Love is not endless, and neither is patience. It must be recognized, appreciated, and nurtured while it's present. Waiting until it withdraws is too late, because once an empath goes cold, what is lost is not just affection. It is trust, safety, and the possibility of returning to what once was. And so, when we look at the journey of the empath and the avoidant, it becomes clear that love is both a gift and a responsibility. The empath teaches us the beauty of giving, of seeing beyond someone's walls, of offering compassion where others might only offer judgment. But they also remind us that even the deepest well can run dry, and that love must be valued, not assumed. The avoidant, on the other hand, reveals what happens when fear dictates connection. Their story shows us that distance may feel safe in the short term, but in the long run, it only magnifies loneliness. When the empath finally steps back, the avoidant is forced to face the reality they've been hiding from, that closeness is not a threat, but a necessity, and that love withheld is often love lost. The lesson for all of us is simple but profound. If you are the one who gives, protect your heart and know your worth. If you are the one who withdraws, understand that connection is fragile and it requires effort, presence, and gratitude. Value love while it's here. Cherish the people who pour into you, and never wait until silence teaches you the importance of their voice, because when a super empath goes cold, it is not the end of their love, it is the beginning of their self-respect. And in that moment, the entire dynamic changes forever. Thank you for listening, thank you for your energy, and thank you for sharing this space with me today. Take care of yourselves, take care of your connections, and never forget the power of valuing love while you still have it. Goodbye, and thank you.